Okay, everybody, welcome back. I'm here today talking with Sumner Nesbitt from Walt Disney Hometown Museum. And a lot of people know, a lot of Disney fans know that Walt Disney spent some formative years in Marceline, Missouri, a small town in northern Missouri that has had a special place for Walt Disney the person, was one of the reference points or inspirations for Mainstreet USA at Disneyland, which a lot of people know. And in Marceline, they have several different landmarks around Walt Disney, and they also have a museum. Um, the museum hometown Walt Disney Hometown Museum is somewhere I've wanted to travel for a long time. And so hopefully one day I'll be able to get there. And so I wanted to talk to Sumner about this. He works at the museum. And so thank you very much for joining us, Sumner. And if you to get us started, go ahead and talk about your kind of background in your fandom, where you started in your fandom, and how you got to uh, the museum and Marceline, Missouri today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for asking me to do this and for thinking I have an interesting enough story to display here. So thank you so much for that. But going back to a fandom basis, there's never been a time I can think of where Disney has not been just this hugely intriguing factor to me. When I was a little kid, I had these two older sisters, and they were both involved with ballet and gymnastics, and each of them did two different ballet classes and two different gymnastics classes every day. So I felt like I was always in the car, with my mom
Mhm.
taking them from one place to another, right? And while I was in the car, I had my very first edition of Disney A to Z, which was the official Disney encyclopedia at the time. It's written by Dave Smith from the Disney Archives, and I used to carry that around with me all the time. Every vacation we went on, every car trip I was on, every time I was in the car, I was reading this encyclopedia. And I was just looking through it for fun, but really, I guess in hindsight, it was kind of preparation for I guess where things would go. But I remember going through this and finding interesting things and asking my mom, going, "Hey, do you remember this, or do you know about this? And can you tell me about this?" So my mom was always this kind of good conversationalist to have when it came to Disney history, particularly because my mom grew up in a very very rural community in Alabama, which is where I'm from initially. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, but my mom grew up in rural place called Sylvania, and for her, she didn't have a lot of access to things beyond her community, and what she really kind of saw as like the window to bigger worlds out there was watching Walt Disney on on television on a weekly basis, and also watching the Mickey Mouse Club. These were things that were hugely important to her as a kid. That kind of showed her that there were these bigger things out there that she could maybe one day kind of be exposed to. And so that was always something that was important for her. And so that was, a way that we were able to, kind of converse about these different Disney topics. I could ask her about, things she remember experiencing as a kid. And so that was something that, really kind of cemented my love
Mhm.
for Disney and just kind of the Disney historical aspect of it all. So, like I said, there's never been a time where Disney hasn't been this, kind of important factor to my life. But it was just, it was just an interest of mine. I didn't really
Mhm.
have an expertise or anything like that. However, when I graduated from high school, I decided to go to University of Central Florida, which is based in Orlando.
Mhm.
And I went there because that is, primarily that's where I wanted to study film, and they had a film program there. But I also knew that if I went to school there, there was a pretty strong possibility maybe I could start, kind of working part time
Yeah.
over at the Disney parks. And so, growing up in Alabama, just a state above Florida, we were fortunate enough to be able to make that trip down to Florida on several occasions. So I grew up going to Walt Disney World, And I actually only visited Disneyland for the first time when I was a senior in high school, because that was essentially kind of a senior trip for me.
Mhm.
I wanted to go to Disneyland because I wanted to see the real location, and so. Um, so I went down to UCF and studied film there, and of course, while I was there, I started working at Walt Disney World. And I remember going through the interview, and they said, "Okay, so if you had three different attractions you'd like to work on, what would they be?" And I, uh, I really wanted to do something where I could kind of, maybe perform a little bit, be in front of a crowd. So of course I said, well, I wanted to do Jungle Cruise, the Kilimanjaro safaris, and the Great Movie Ride back when that was
Mhm.
operating. Because those were kind of the three attractions that really sparked my interest. And they're like, okay, yeah, yeah. And I have no idea how much consideration actually was gone into that because, after I was there, I realized everybody wants to be on those attractions. So, there's a lot of competition for that. So they basically said, so you have no problem speaking in front of people. I'm like, no, no, not at all. And they're like, okay. So I was not placed on any of those attractions. Instead, I was placed on the attractions of Mainstreet USA, which if you think of Mainstreet USA, attractions is not really typically the focus of Main Street. So I was a little disappointed at first because again I wanted to be on one of those flashy attractions
Mhm.
that I love to experience myself. And instead I was on Main Street, and my primary job was to work parade audience control, which really
Okay.
is a fancy way of crowd control, way of
Yeah.
saying crowd control. So what we would do is we would set up for parades and fireworks or any sort of special events that would happen. So like anytime they did special filming or taping or anything like that for a TV special, and they would have crowd shots, we would help set those up. And so that's what I did, and I realized that Main Street actually was that was a perfect place for me to be,
Mhm.
because if I was on an attraction, I would kind of be regulated to that specific attraction. Whereas if I was on Main Street, I kind of had a little bit more free reign to be able to kind of experience the land as a whole. And, for me, growing up and going to the Disney parks, Main Street was, while it was a cool place, it was never the focus of my Disney parks experience. I was going through Main Street in order to get to Space Mountain or, Big Thunder Mountain or
Yeah.
something, a little bit more exciting. However, that time on Main Street was really important for me, and it really made me just kind of reevaluate my own personal opinions of the Disney parks, particularly Magic Kingdom, and also my just overall um, viewpoint on the importance of kind of some of the scenery there. And so now, if you ask me what my favorite land at any Disney park is, it's going to be Main Street USA.
Yeah.
But while I was on Main Street, one of the jobs I ended up getting to do was I did ended up getting to drive the Main Street vehicles, which
Okay.
was one of my favorite things. I got to drive the Main Street vehicles, and I also got to be a conductor on the Walt Disney World Railroad, which was also a really really fun job as well. And obviously, the railroad is another important aspect to Disney history and also to Walt as a person. So one of the jobs I ended up doing on Main Street though was it's called a facilitator. So whenever you're a new cast member at any Disney park, or at least back then, I'm sure things may have changed nowadays. So back then, whenever you were a new cast member, essentially you had traditions, which was orientation, and that was for everybody, no matter where they
Mhm.
worked, what job they were going to do. And then after traditions, you were then broken up into smaller groups, and you were broken up into smaller groups depending on what park you would be at, and also what line of business, whether it's merchandise, food and beverage, or attractions, or whatever. And then you'd also be broken up into lands. So you would then spend the next 2 days with a facilitator. So I was kind of this interim. I was sort of a trainer, but I wasn't necessarily an on the job trainer. Instead, I was kind of this person that I got to really tour new cast members around the land that they were going to be at. So I got to tour
Mhm.
these new Main Street cast members around Main Street. And of course, there's other, more specific things that we had to do about the specific roles that were involved. But my favorite aspect of being a facilitator was I got to give them a tour of Main Street USA. And while I was giving them a tour of Main Street USA, I got to learn so much about the importance of Main Street to not just Disney history, but also just to Walt as a person. And obviously, the name Marceline came up many many times, in that process. So Marceline, it was this like bucket list place for me. It was like I got to get to
Mhm.
Marceline. There's always this place that was on my mind, and I had a few planned and failed attempts to make a trip out here. because I wanted to come to Marceline on a very, very specific day. Because me and Walt have the same birthday, and I wanted to come to
Oh,
Marceline on our birthdays. I just felt like that would be a really fun time to be here. So I didn't want to just come to Marceline at any time. I wanted to come, that specific day. So I finally made it to Marceline in December of 2021. I had actually planned a trip the year before, but obviously,
yeah.
pandemic, was a factor in that. So finally made it to Marceline in December of 2021. And I'm the type of person that does a lot of research on things. So I did a whole lot of research on Marceline and just different things that have happened there and the museum. And I knew a lot about this person named Rush Johnson. Now, Rush was a resident of Marceline. He was also a good friend of Walt Disney. And Rush was one of the founders of the museum. And also, he was one of the people that really kept Walt Disney's legacy, alive in Marceline for
Mhm.
many years. And Rush had a daughter named Kay Mallins, and Kay Mallins is the current executive director of the Walt Disney Hometown Museum. But she also is, again, one of the founders of the museum. And again, she grew up with her dad and Walt being good friends, so she grew up in this very interesting world. So I knew a lot about Kay, and I knew a lot about Rush. And I knew that Rush had passed away. And so I came to the museum hoping that maybe I could run into Kay. Um, I did not. I did not meet Kay on that trip. However, when I came to the museum, there was this woman that was volunteering that day. She was volunteering behind the desk. And whenever you come into the museum, sometimes the person behind the desk will give you a little bit of a, just kind of give you a starting off point. It's a self-guided tour, but she'll give you a little starting off point to be able to experience what you're going to see in the museum. And the woman working behind the desk that day, her name was Inez, and she was an elderly woman, and I did not know much about her prior to me visiting. But I came into the museum, and there was another woman working beside her, and she said, "Well, if you're interested in Disney history, Inez is really the person that you want to talk to." And so Inez started talking to me, and she started telling me about how her family was good friends with the Disneys. And she started telling me about how the Disney family actually stayed with her and her family when they would visit Marceline, and how they actually were house guests of the Disney family in California, and how,
Hmm.
Walt and Roy gave them personal tours of the studio and Disneyland and things like that. And I said, wait a second, wait a second. I said, who was your husband? And she said, it was Rush Johnson. And I was like, so Kay is
Hmm.
your daughter? And she said, yes. And so I was like, okay, this all makes sense now.
Yeah.
So Inez Johnson is the wife of Rush Johnson and the mother of Kay Mallins. So I knew a lot about Rush, I knew a lot about Kay, but I did not know much about Inez. And to be honest with you, I didn't know she would still be living. Inez, she's still alive. She is 95 years old, and she is still very much a proponent of telling her Disney stories when she can. So that really was a life changing moment for me. I had been to presentations and things like that where older Imagineers or animators or something like that were there, and they were talking about working with Walt and things. But this is the first time I've really had this personal conversation with
Hmm.
somebody who knew Walt on not just a working level, but just a personal level. I mean, Walt stayed at her house on multiple occasions, and these were people that really knew him as a person. And she was sitting there telling me these stories, and this is things that I've never experienced before. And so, my life was changed just from listening to that. Just
Yeah.
from listening to her stories, my life was changed, and it was great because she would say, "Okay, well, go look at the museum. Go look at the museum." So I was walking around the museum, and then she would pop her head around the corner, and she would say, "Can I tell you another story?" And I'd be like, "Yes, please. Come tell me all the stories." And so um, I I just had a wonderful experience while I was here,
Yeah.
and it's like, while I was here, it was not hard to understand why uh, there was magic to Marceline to Walt. Like it was not difficult to understand why it was such a captivating place for him. And so my trip ended. I went back home, and the day I went back home, I typed up an email to the museum to just thank them for the experience that I had, and just thank them for putting on a great show. And while I was doing that, I went to their website so I could get their email address from there. And when I opened up their website, they posted that day that they were hiring an operations manager. So I
Okay.
thought, well, I need to apply for this.
Yeah.
So I did, and when I came up here to visit, I had no idea but I came up here to visit just as a guest, and had no plans. But I ended up moving here 2 months later, and now I manage the museum. So it's been quite a journey for me. It's been very exciting, and just working at the Disney parks was always fun, and that was a time that I that was just this wonderful time of like kind of growth, just individually for me, but also just it was a really important time in my life that I would never ever forget. But working in the parks was never an end goal for me. That was always just something that I wanted to do just to kind of fuel my
Mhm.
fandom. But you know, it was never something that I'd ever thought of to be long term. My interest was always something um, on the history side of things. Something historical, something a little bit more on that sort of spectrum. And so, being able to come up here and just be a part of this whole world, we've gotten to, work with the Disney archives. We've gotten to work with, Disney fans from all over the world, and, gotten to work with different historians and authors and professors and teachers and things like that. That has been just absolutely amazing, just to be a part of this whole environment of people. And just to kind of add one little thing to that. So when I told you I'd started working on Main Street at the parks. When I moved here, it was really important for me, if I could, um, to live on Main Street USA. See, in Marceline, we
Okay.
have we have the original Main Street USA. That's literally our Main Street name is Main Street USA. So I was able to actually I was able to actually get a building on Main Street, and now my home address is Main Street USA. So
That's cool.
it really does come full circle for me in a way. And This I don't know if you can tell, but the hat I'm wearing is for the Main Street Electrical Parade.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite hat. I wear it all the time because that parade actually is what I started doing. Parade audience control for when I
Mhm.
was first working at Magic Kingdom, and now I get to live on Main Street. So it's just really exciting to to just kind of be fully absorbed into all this.
Yeah, that's so cool. Thanks for that. There's like I was trying to remember questions and like things to talk about during that. Like one, it's so cool, like the family connection, where you talk about with, you would ask questions, you would ask your mom questions
Mhm.
and be able to converse with her about, those those connections she had with Walt Disney. And I've heard so many people talk about when the Wonderful World of Disney was on, and being able to watch and being able to watch with family, and that being kind of the what people did on Sunday nights. That's really really cool. And being able to like go to the parks a lot. I grew up in East Texas, so it was probably 14 hours for us. So we would, y- you know, I think I probably went 4 or 5 times, made the drive, and we would leave in the middle of the night most of the time. My sister and I would wake up, and we were already in Florida and thinking like, oh, this is really, really cool. Well,
Yeah,
we were in the panhandle of Florida, because we would take Interstate 10 across.
yeah,
And so, we would wake up, we'd be like, oh my goodness, we're here already. And we'd really have, another like 5 or 6 hours then before we would get there. But and actually the first time I went to Disneyland was this last summer.
oh wow, okay.
We were supposed to go in May 2020. I had a conference
Mm,
in San
yeah,
Diego, and obviously that didn't happen. So this last year, we went on a family vacation, and we went to San Diego. The first weekend we were going to be in San Diego was actually Comic-Con. So I said, well, it'd be really, really cool to go to Comic-Con sometime, but I know the traffic's really bad. So let's drive up to Anaheim a few days. So we did that. And um, so this last summer was the first time of being able to see, the park where Walt Disney, the person walked.
yeah,
Um, and one reason why I always say Walt Disney the person is I think there are more and more people who who don't realize that Walt Disney was a person. Um, you know, it's kind of, they think of the Walt Disney Company, or they think of Disney World, or, actually the vernacular Walt Disney World. Um, but they don't realize that this was an individual who is responsible for this. And him and his brother created this studio, and which led to, the movies that people have, the theme parks that people are able to attend. And so thanks for that history, and being able to like go through your history, being able to live there now. That's really, really cool. And I did not know that Main Street was called Mainstreet USA in
Mhm.
Marceline. Um,
Well, well,
do you
technically it was Kansas Avenue.
okay.
When Walt lived here, it was Kansas Avenue. But it was commonly referred to as just Main Street, by the
Yeah.
locals. But it was technically Kansas Avenue. And then after, um, Disneyland had opened and Mainstreet USA was incorporated in the Disney parks, they then renamed Main Street USA. Or
Okay.
they renamed Kansas Avenue Main Street USA here in Marceline. So it was only named Main Street USA after
Yeah.
after the tribute that had already been made in the parks. And just to kind of sprinkle a little bit of kind of Disney magic on that too. Mickey actually did come and unveil our street signs for us when
Oh,
they did
cool.
have our official renaming, and our street signs are very unique because they do have mouse ears on them. So
Okay.
it is yeah. So we try to bring in that Disney flair whenever we can.
That's very cool. Yeah, I was going to ask when, because I did know the history of, Canvas Avenue, or Kansas Avenue, but I was going to ask when it was renamed, if that was something more recent. So that was after Disneyland opened. So it's been Main Street USA for a while now.
Well, it was after Disneyland opened, but it was a while after. So
Okay.
it was actually in the '90s when it got renamed.
Okay. Okay.
But it was before the museum opened, because the museum opened in 2001 as part of Walt's 100th birthday celebration.
Okay.
And so it was before that happened. And But it was in the '90s though. So
Yeah. So then the next thing that I think is really interesting. Well, here's the next thing I was going to ask about is the establishment, the history of the museum. Before
Mhm.
we get to that, so everybody knows, before we started recording, Sumner shared a just fascinating, like, topic with me, that in Missouri, in northern Missouri, Highway 36. Can you talk a few minutes about what Highway 36 is in northern Missouri?
Yeah, so at Highway 36, it stretches from St. Joseph, Missouri, from the west of Missouri, all the way to Hannibal, to the east of Missouri. And if you're familiar with Hannibal, you probably know that because of Mark Twain. So Mark Twain, that's where he was born around there, and spent his young adult years there. I grew up there, and obviously became the setting for many of his more famous stories and characters. And so Hannibal itself is another kind of tourist town, and with a lot of history there. And so Highway 36 has been named the Way of American Genius because of all the different people who have lived or been born along this highway. So we should have Mark Twain and Hannibal, but then of course you have Walt Disney and Marceline, and then a little bit further past Marceline, you have Laclede, which is where General Pershing was from. General Pershing, obviously very instrumental with World War One. Actually, when Walt Disney was an ambulance driver for the American Red
Hmm.
Cross in World War One, he actually drove General Pershing at
Mm,
one point in time. And so they had a state connection, but then they also had a different connection later on too. So further beyond that, you have Hamilton, Missouri, which is where J.C. Penney is from, and there is a J.C. Penney museum there as well. And then, if you keep going to St. Joe, that's where the Pony Express started. also in St. Joseph, not that he was a genius necessarily, but in St. Joseph, there is another historical aspect, and that is where Jesse James did spend a lot of time.
Mm.
And so the house that he was killed in actually is in St. Joseph. And so St. Joseph also is where Walter Cronkite was born. And so Walter Cronkite does have a memorial there in St. Joseph. And Walter Cronkite obviously does have a very strong Disney connection as well. He was one of the narrators for Spaceship Earth at Epcot for a while, and also did a segment for back when it was called Disney MGM Studios, Disney's Hollywood Studios now. So he did a segment called Back to Neverland with Robin Williams, where Robin Williams and Walter Cronkite learned the history of animation, essentially. And so Walter Cronkite has also had a very involved career with Disney at times as well. So yeah, it's just it's really interesting, all the people that were kind of along this highway, and some of the ideas also that were developed along the highway, because in Chillicothe, Missouri, which is also along this highway, is where sliced bread was invented. And so,
Mm-hmm.
it's the home of sliced bread. And, so there's all these really different aspects of things that happen along this highway. And there's a lot more as well, but these are kind of the bigger topics that we hit when we talk about Highway 36. And I do want to share one thing that's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And that is in 1981, there was a television special, and it was called One Man's Dream.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was about, it was kind of this hybrid, it was like this, a hybrid TV special about the construction of Epcot. But it was also a little bit of a TV movie on Walt Disney's, kind of young life. So it followed his life here in Marceline, and then also when he was in Kansas City as well, developing his first studio. And so, it kind of went back and forth between showing Epcot and also kind of showing scenes from Walt Disney's life. But in this television special, One Man's Dream, there actually is a fictional scene where an older Mark Twain visits a young Walt Disney. And Mark Twain says something to Walt along the lines of, we Missouri boys got to stick together, or something like that. So, just kind of further emphasizing that
Yeah.
that Missouri connection. And I will say this too, there was actually a song written for that TV special, and the name of the song was called "All Roads Lead to Marceline." Country singer Mac Davis sang the song,
Mm.
and that's kind of a unofficial slogan that we like to have often is all roads lead to Marceline, because if you look at Walt Disney's life and career, all these different important things that that developed him as a person, but all these different things that were important to him to incorporate into his work. It's almost kind of like each one of them does have some sort of connection back to Marceline somehow, and we can get further into that a little bit later. But yeah, all roads lead to Marceline is one of our favorite slogans to say.
Yeah, that's cool. The next time that we make the trip up to through Missouri, now I have a new place. Like I said, I've always wanted to stop in Marceline and spend the day in Marceline. And maybe one of these times I'll be able to go Highway 36 across the state as well, because that's really, really cool. I love learning little tidbits like that. So the museum itself, you said it opened in 2001.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about tell us about the establishment of it, the history of the museum, and what type of connection you have, if any, with the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah. So, to really tell the origins of the museum, even though the museum opened in 2001, I do have to take you back to 1956. So in 1956, this is a year after Disneyland has opened, and it's also, 2 years after Walt's television show has debuted on TV. And so, we've talked about, the importance that that TV show had on just, American life,
Mhm.
not just with young people, but just people of all generations. That TV show is important because, people knew of Walt Disney, because of his films and things. But that TV show really made people feel like they knew Walt personally. That show made it feel like Walt was, there in their living rooms talking to them specifically, and that's where he kind of developed this Uncle Walt persona.
Mhm.
And so, in '56, there was going to be a new pool that was built in Marceline. It was the first pool, public pool in Lynn County, which was a very big deal. And one of the guys on the city council said, "Hey, you know what? What if we name this new pool after Walt Disney?" And the city council was like, "No, no, he's not going to go for that." Because again, the stature that he had at this time. Now, there was still a lot of people in town that knew the Disney family, from their time when they lived here. Um, and Walt had been back a few times as well, in between then and now. Never a highly publicized event, but the picture that you have in the background,
Hmm.
where you see, Marceline there, that is our museum. But before it was the museum, it actually served as the train depot here in Marceline. So there were 7 passenger trains a day, and it was really almost impossible to go on the rails from California to either Chicago or to New York without passing through Marceline. So, it wasn't uncommon for Walt to be on the train, riding on the train as a passenger getting, somewhere. And when it would stop in Marceline, he would just hop off. Again, just unannounced, just, kind of on his own. He would get off the train and just kind of explore. And then he would hop on the next train and, and then leave town. So, and that was kind of common for a lot of travelers, to be honest with you. When they would go through different smaller cities and towns. Walt hadn't had a huge public event in Marceline since he left as a kid. So the Disney family still had some friends that were here at the time, but they weren't particularly close with a lot of people here in Marceline and 56. And again, Walt's very successful doing his own thing. And so, when the idea was presented to have the Walt Disney pool named after Walt, that was kind of an out there idea.
Hmm.
And so this guy that was on the city council was just like, well, just let's reach out to him. Let's just see if possibly he'd be interested. So they reached out to Walt, and the idea was they were not just going to rename, or they were not just going to name the pool after him, but they're going to rename the park as well. So it was the Santa Fe Country Club Park is where it used to be. Santa Fe Railroad essentially, built Marceline as a
Hmm.
railroad town, and so the idea was we'll rename the entire park. It'll be now the Walt Disney Municipal Park and Pool. And Walt loved the idea. He loved the idea and said, "Is there going to be a dedication ceremony? Because if so, I would love to come. I would love to come." And they said, "Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We can have a dedication ceremony." So Walt said, "I'm coming back." And Roy said he wants to come back too. And they brought their wives, Lily and Edna, with them. And they were really excited to come. And not just they were going to come back for this pool dedication, but Walt decided he was going to bring some gifts. So the Great Locomotive Chase movie starring
Hmm.
Fess Parker, that actually had its Midwestern premiere here in Marceline. He brought a film print to that. Every child in Marceline got to see it for free, and Walt and Roy actually stood outside the theater and greeted each guest as they came through. They showed the movie for almost 24 hours in a row, just so that every kid had a chance to see it. They also judged the Miss Marceline pageant as well while they were here for that time. And also while they were back, Walt was like, "I want to revisit all my boyhood all my boyhood hometown, favorite spots." So they, kind of recreated a lot of moments for Walt where they visited the old farm that he grew up on. When Walt first arrived to Marceline, he arrived on a train on that same platform that you see behind you,
Yeah.
because he was born in Chicago, moved to Marceline when he was 4 years old. And when he arrived in Marceline on the train, he talked about how a gentleman picked him up in a wagon, pulled by horses. And so Walt wanted to ride in a wagon pulled by horses. And so that was something, from his childhood that he wanted to recreate while he was here. So we've got some great photos of, Walt and Roy in this wagon, and but they wanted to kind of relive all these moments of their youth. And one of those, obviously, too, was going to Yellow Creek. So Yellow Creek, not necessarily an attractive place to go, but it was where Walt caught his first fish, and so he wanted to go back to Yellow Creek, and he wanted to go fishing off Yellow Creek
Hmm.
again. So it's just, yeah, he was reliving these moments that he remembered as a boy, and this all took place over the Fourth of July holiday. So it was a 3-day event. Walt and Roy came back and did all these things, and the most important thing that happened while they came back, though, was the Allen Hotel here in Marceline did not have air conditioning. And so the city council was a little concerned about Walt and Roy and Edna and Lily staying in a place without air conditioning. If you're familiar with the construction of Disney's studios, um, that was a huge novel thing that Disney actually incorporated into a studio that he built in the 30s, in the late 30s, early 40s. Is, that was really the first studio to have full AC, and so air conditioning was kind of a big deal. And so not a lot of people in Midwestern Missouri had that at the time. And so just so happens that the only family in town that had air conditioning was Rush and Inez Johnson. Now, Rush Johnson also just happened to be the same guy who was the city council member that had the idea of naming the pool after Walt Disney in the first place. So they said, they told Rush and Inez that they would like for the Disney family to stay with them. And Rush was all about it, and Inez Johnson was not. She actually cried when Rush asked her if the Disneys could stay with her. And she said, have you seen our furniture lately? Because they had all this hand-me-down furniture because they had spent all their money on air conditioning. They were this young couple at the time, and they didn't have a whole lot, and that's where they put their investment. And so something that was really important that happened as a result of that is also something that was really important aspect of Marceline in general, and that's the communal spirit of Marceline. So when the town found out that Rush and Inez were worried about having the Disney family staying with them because of the furniture, the town essentially rallied together and they said, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to throw your junk out for 3 days, and we're going to bring in our newer stuff. And you can have, our collective furniture for 3 days while the Disneys are staying with you. And then once the Disneys are gone, we'll swap our furniture back out again. And that is very much a typical Marceline characteristic. And that was something that really was important to Walt when he lived here too. And we can get into that later. But that community spirit of Marceline is something that still is here today. It's like whenever we have a big event, we're always rallying together and kind of getting the town to together to put on a show. Not unlike those old like Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland films from like the 30s and 40s. It's like the town gets together to put on the show, and this is an example of that. Mm-hmm. So the town got together. They provided some furniture for the Johnsons to have, and honestly, in the end, it didn't matter because the Disneys, were not they were not pretentious people. That was not something that would have bothered them, one way or the other. In fact, Walt actually ended up staying with them many times after that. So it really wasn't a huge deal. But something that was really important about that visit is that really cemented the friendship between Rush Johnson and Walt Disney. And Rush became friends with Roy Disney as well, but he really connected with Walt very strongly so. And, like I mentioned, Walt would just casually, come into Marceline on the train. Well, now he had somebody to call and say, hey, I'm in Marceline, can you come pick me up at the train station? So, now Walt had this personal connection in Marceline, and Rush had a personal connection with Walt Disney. And so their friendship lasted the rest of Walt Disney's life and even beyond that as well. So Rush and Walt always talked about doing something in Marceline, and this is again, I can tell you a little bit more about kind of some of their plans later on. But one of the things that they had thought about was to have a library, Disney library, and it would contain different Disney books and things like that, and it could have Walt Disney's name on it. And Walt said, he said libraries are for dead people. You name libraries after dead people. And he said, same with museums. So Walt was not really supportive of the idea of having a Walt Disney Museum or anything like that named after him specifically while he was alive. Yeah. And so a couple of years later, in 1960, when a new school was being built here, and that school, when Walt found out about it, that they were going to be building a new school, Walt actually was the one that suggested to name it the Walt Disney Elementary School. So our elementary school here in Marceline is the Walt Disney Elementary School. And actually, Walt donated a lot of gifts to the elementary school as well. He donated artwork that he had one of his artists, Bob Moore, Disney legend Bob Moore. He came in and designed these character murals all throughout the school that are still there today. In fact, the day that we're recording this on is actually Bob Moore's birthday. So, so today is Bob Moore's birthday. Yeah. But also Walt donated a flagpole from the 1960 Winter Olympics. So the school opened in October of 1960. And in the early months of 1960, Walt was the head of pageantry for the 1960 Winter Olympics. And from those Olympic Games, he saved 2 flagpoles. He put one at the studios in Burbank, and then he donated the other one to Marceline. And that flagpole is still in front of the museum, or I'm sorry, it's still in front of the elementary school today. And not just that, but he also donated a flag to fly above the flagpole, and that's an orange Mickey flag. And that orange Mickey flag used to fly above the firehouse at Disneyland, which is where his personal apartment was. So that orange Mickey flag is now on display in the museum, and they don't. It's not flying on the in front of the school anymore. But yeah, so Walt got very involved with Marceline, and Rush and Walt became very good friends, and then something else really cool happened, and that was in 1966, after the 64-65 World's Fair. They were moving a lot of attractions from New York to Disneyland. One of those being It's a Small World. So when they were moving an attraction over to Disneyland, they needed some space for it, and there was an attraction there called the Midget Autopia. Now I know that that term could be negative, could be used in a negative way. However, that's not the intention of the name of the attraction. There was a thing called midget car racing, which is people racing in smaller cars, and that's what it was named after. And so, that is a disclaimer that we do like to, we do want to make sure that everybody is aware of. But the Midget Autopia was an attraction at Disneyland from 1957 until 1966. And when they were putting in It's a Small World, they removed that attraction. And Walt had the idea of, rather than just remove the attraction, he wanted to donate it to Marceline. So Marceline actually held the Midget Autopia from 1966 until 1977. So it actually ran here for 11 years. And it is the only time a Disney attraction has ever left a Disney park and continued operations somewhere else. So we feel very fortunate to have that gift from Walt. And again, this was 1966. So Walt had fully intended to come back for the dedication ceremony of the Midget Autopia. However, he called a few days prior and said that he wasn't going to be able to make it. He said that he had a cough he just couldn't shake. That was July of 1966, and he passed away in December of 1966 of lung cancer. So that was him getting those early signs.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we did have a lot of gifts from Walt, and we did have a lot of involvement from Walt for several years. Rush was always trying to keep that Disney spirit alive. He was trying to, even after Walt passed away, he was always trying to figure out ways that he could, kind of keep Walt's legacy intact. And so, some of the things that happened in Marceline during that interim period of time was there was the Mainstreet USA renaming, and also in 1998 there was the Spirit of Mickey, which was a cartoon compilation of different Mickey Mouse short films. That actually held its premiere here in Marceline as well. In which case, Mickey and Minnie and Goofy and Donald, they all came down, and they had this big parade in Marceline, and they put on a show on Main Street. And so there's different things that happened throughout those years. Mickey came back on many occasions, and he actually used to be in our homecoming parade for a while, for a few years in a row. Yeah, so Mickey would come back every now and then, and different things would happen. But as far as big events go, things were kind of quiet for a while. And that is until leading up until 2001. Now, I did mention that the building that you are sitting in front of is the Walt Disney Hometown Museum, but it was formerly the train station. So trains obviously are a big interest of Walt Disney, and his love for trains started here in Marceline. And obviously, Marceline is very endearing to the concept of railroading, because Marceline was a railroad town. Back in the early days of Marceline, the Santa Fe Railroad literally just drew lines between different major metropolitan areas, and then every 100 miles would draw an X, and those X's would be what they called division points. And they would develop towns where those X's were, and Marceline was one of those X's. So the Santa Fe Railroad, built Marceline. So railroading community and the railroading profession are very important aspects to Marceline. And so around that same time, the Santa Fe Railroad was now acquired by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And, railroad passengers had kind of faded out, and now it was pretty much all freight trains, much like the train that you see behind you. And so this railroad station was not really being used as a station anymore. In fact, it was just this abandoned building. So Rush and his wife Inez and their daughter Kay decided that they wanted to purchase that building and restore it. Now, they always had this idea of wanting to do something for Walt, but they always wanted to restore this building as well. And it just so happened that these two different paths kind of crossed, and they
Hmm.
realized that they could put a Walt Disney Museum in the old train station. Now, something else important happened during this time that led to the creation of the museum, and that was Ruth Disney. So Walt Disney had a little sister, Ruth, and the Johnsons became good friends with Ruth, much like they became good friends with Roy, because of Walt. And so Ruth Disney came back to Marceline several times after both of her brothers had passed away, and she didn't pass away until 1995. So it was many years after both Walt and Roy. And she was the last of the Disney siblings to pass away. And she, over time, had kind of become this collector of family artifacts.
Okay.
And she had mentioned on several occasions that she wanted her family artifacts to be in Marceline. And it wasn't until she passed away that that official request was made for all of her family artifacts to be relocated to Marceline with the purposes of starting a Disney museum in Marceline. And so that happened around the same time that the Johnsons acquired this building behind you. And so we thought, what better place to put a Walt Disney Museum than in a train station? And Walt has been through that building many, many times as a passenger, and now it's a building that can kind of house his legacy. And not just that, but again, Walt Disney. We mentioned he was born in Chicago. Bob Thomas wrote a biography on Walt Disney, an American Original. And the second chapter starts off with saying, Walt Disney remembered almost nothing of his time in Chicago, but the memories of Marceline would last for him the rest of his life. And Walt himself even wrote in 1938, he wrote that he clearly remembers the day riding in on that train into Marceline.
Hmm.
So it's safe to say that Walt's life really did begin in Marceline. Even though he wasn't born there, his life really did begin in Marceline. And it's right on those train tracks that are behind you there that he first stepped off into Marceline. And so, we thought that was the best place to have a Disney museum. So in 2001, there was a 3-day event in honoring Walt Disney's 100th birthday celebration. I do have to say that there was a little bit of a roadblock in front of the event because this happened at the end of September 2001.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with some other things that happened in September of 2001, that was a challenge. So they had expected to have 130,000 people visit Marceline over these 3 days, and there when 9/11 happened, there was a lot of conversations as to whether or not they should keep going
Hmm.
with this planned event. I mean, they've been planning this event for over 3 years, and they were ready for it, and they actually got more letters of support asking them to keep the event on than they did, any sort of detracting, letters, asking
Yeah.
for the event to be canceled. And so they kept the event going. They didn't have as big of a crowd as they wanted, but they did have almost 80,000 people in Marceline that day, or over those 3 days. But as part of the event, the Walt Disney Hometown Museum was officially opened, and not only that, but also the Disney Family Farm, where Walt Disney grew up, was now open to the public as well. And the Disney Farm, the original 40 acres that the Disney family owned when they lived here in Marceline, is now under the ownership of a private person, but we have a good relationship. The museum and the farm have a good relationship, and so we do work together with each other. But the farm is open to the public every day of the year. It's free to go, and the original barn that was at the farm when Walt lived there had unfortunately crumbled over time, and so the original structure was not there anymore. However, when Walt lived in California, he had his own train in his backyard, the
Hmm.
Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, and the structure that he built to be his train's workshop and the place where he housed the train was a replica of the barn that he had while he was in
Okay.
Marceline. And so Diane Disney, Walt's daughter, supplied to us the blueprints of the structure that Walt had from his backyard to Marceline, so that we could reconstruct the barn here on the Disney farm. So the barn that we have is not the original structure, but it is a replica of a replica essentially,
Yeah.
and we are using Walt Disney's original blueprints for it. So as part of that 3-day celebration for Walt's 100th birthday, they rebuilt the barn, and so now that's something that was open to the public as well. So yeah, so that's kind of how the museum got started, and it got started based off, the collection of Ruth Disney's family artifacts, and it's just kind of grown from there.
Yeah.
And I will have to say that one really interesting aspect of Ruth's relationship to Walt and her brothers and everything. So Ruth was the whole Disney family was actually very close. Throughout the end of their lives. Um, but Walt convinced all of his family to move to Los Angeles. Once he had settled there and him and Roy had gained some success, they were able to convince their two older brothers, Herbert and Raymond, as well as their parents, Flora and Elias, to move to Los Angeles. And Ruth even actually stayed in Los Angeles for a little bit of time, but she married a man from Portland named Ted Beecher. So Ruth, really established herself in Portland. But her connection with the Disney family remained strong, and Ruth communicated to the Disneys, her brothers and Walt, and her parents primarily through letters. And Ruth saved everything, and made copies of everything too. Ruth had this special way of communicating with the Disney family that those of them that were in LA didn't necessarily have with each other because they were
Hmm.
local to each other. They could speak to each other, differently. Whereas Ruth was talking to them through letters. And so, this collection of letters that we have from Ruth is really important because it does give us this interesting insight into the Disney family as people, in a
Hmm.
way that we may not have been able to have documented elsewhere.
That's very cool. That's really cool. One thing I was wondering while you were talking, I knew about the elementary school. Um, we talked about Mainstreet USA being renamed. How many, do you know how many places in Marceline carry the Walt Disney name?
Well, things that carry the Disney name, there are going to be, let's see, um, there are going to be four official ones.
Okay.
However, there's other things that also, have a role within Disney history that don't necessarily carry the Disney name. So we have the Walt Disney Elementary School.
Hmm.
We have the Walt Disney Municipal Park that he came back to dedicate. And then we have the Walt Disney Hometown Museum. And then we have the Walt Disney Post Office. So the Walt
Okay.
Disney Post Office actually was renamed in 2004. And it is the only federal building named after Walt Disney. And it actually hosted, so it was named in 2004, um, but it actually had a Disney story way before that because in 1968, there was a Walt Disney stamp that was issued. And that stamp was issued from the Marceline Post Office back in 1968.
Oh, cool.
And that was a huge event in Marceline at the time too, because well, first of all, I mean, Walt Disney, was a big deal, and he had just
Hmm.
passed away 2 years prior. But there was representatives from over 70 countries that came in from that. The entire Disney family was here. Roy was here. Willie was here. Walt's widow, and Walt's daughters Sharon and Diane were here with their families. They actually took a train car from Kansas City to Marceline, and they renamed the entire train the Walt Disney Special. And they brought the Disney family in on that train. It was this Disney themed train they brought the Disney family in on, and so that was a really big day for Marceline as well. But that Walt Disney stamp was issued here in Marceline, and now the post office has been renamed the Walt Disney Post Office. And if you go to that post office today, you can get actually a special stamp cancellation that you can only get here in Marceline. And whenever we do big events or anything like that, we're usually able to get a special stamp cancellation just for that day. So that's pretty cool. Um, and then we also do have those are the four locations in town that do bear Walt Disney's name. But then we also have the Disney Family Farm, which has the Disney name
Hmm.
attached to it. And then, again, there's several other locations in town that have a place in Disney history that don't necessarily have Walt's name attached to it.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Tell us about the connection that the museum has with either with the company, the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah. So, like I said before, we are a separate nonprofit. We are a separate entity, and there are a few of us out there. There are a few of us that kind of deal specifically with this aspect of Walt Disney's life and history that are separate nonprofits. For example, there is the Walt Disney Birthplace, which is in Chicago. There's the Walt Disney Family Museum, which is in San Francisco, that was started by Diane Disney, his daughter. And then you also have Walt's barn, which is in Los Angeles. That was the barn that was in his backyard. That was a replica of the barn he had here in Marceline. So that is in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And it's been moved from the backyard that Walt lived in to Griffith Park because that house was torn down. And then you also have there's a place called the Garden Grove Historical Society, and that is in Garden Grove, California, right next to Anaheim. And that actually houses Uncle Robert's garage. So when Walt first moved to California, he lived with his
Mm.
Uncle Robert out there in LA, and his first studio in California was in his Uncle Robert's garage. So someone had heard that the garage was going to be torn down, so they were able to relocate it from the house that was it as well, and move it over to this historical society's facilities. So there is also some things going on in Kansas City as well, because Kansas City was where Walt's first official studio
Mhm.
was. And so there are these kind of there are these pockets of different Disney history, all throughout, and we're all set up as nonprofits, and we're all set up as being separate entities from the Walt Disney Company.
Mhm.
However, all of us have, to some degree, a relationship with the Disney Company. So I can't speak on behalf of the others, but for ours, our relationship is primarily through the Walt Disney Archives and D23, Disney's official fan club. So the Walt Disney Archives is always a great resource for us. They've always been a good partner for us, whether it's validating information or fact checking things for us, or just being historical partners on different fronts. But then also D23 has hosted several events here in Marceline. So the past few years, we've actually gotten to host D23 guests here on several occasions. I have been able to be here for two of those, and each one has, or at least the second one, grew substantially from the first one. So when we have another event with D23, maybe it'll grow more from there. But D23 will bring in a group of their members, and we'll spend a day in Marceline. And every time it's a little bit different. We've done scavenger hunts through Marceline where they get to go visit the different Disney historical locations, and then we've ended the day with an event out at the Disney Farm at night,
Mhm.
which is just it's a very beautiful location. If you get out there at the right time of day with the sunset and everything. But we've hosted several events for D23. Last year was our last event that we had, and that was in June of last year. So that event corresponded with a few other different things. So last year was the 100th anniversary of the Walt Disney Company. And so this event that we had in Marceline was a way to celebrate the 100 years of Disney going back to, those roots, that
Mhm.
source of inspiration. So one of the things that happened during that time was I mentioned to you that Walt donated this orange Mickey Mouse flag for the Walt Disney Elementary School. So D23 actually gave us a platinum version of the same flag
Oh, cool.
as a commemorative, version of the 100th anniversary of Disney. So we got a platinum version of the flag, and actually Mickey and Minnie were here to give it to us. So Mickey and Minnie gave it to us themselves, and Donald and Goofy also showed up too. And they also officially declared Marceline to be the official hometown of D23 members. So if you're a
Mm.
D23 member, Marceline is your honorary hometown. So
Very
you are an
cool.
honorary citizen of Marceline if you're a D23 member. And speaking of citizens, Citizens Watch, which is the official timekeeper of Disney, if you go to any Disney park throughout the entire world, if you see a clock, it's going to be a citizen branded clock.
Mhm.
So that's Hong Kong, Paris, Shanghai, California, Florida, wherever you're going to see a Disney clock. It's going to be a Citizen clock. And so Citizen was actually the catalyst for this event for us, because they had built a replica of the clock that's on Mainstreet USA at Magic Kingdom,
Mhm.
and they wanted to bring that to Marceline. And they wanted to build an event surrounding that. And so the initial event we had really kind of stemmed from that. And so where you're standing right now, right behind you, there's no clock in the photo because this photo is a little bit of an older photo. But right behind that fountain, we now have a Citizen clock that is the replica of the clock that's on Main Street USA at Magic Kingdom. And I did mention before that the Midget Autopia is the only attraction to ever
Hmm.
leave a Disney park and continue operation somewhere else. Well, that Citizen Clock that we have is the only um, piece of Disney park IP that also has a replica outside of a Disney
Okay.
park currently. So we kind of have a really interesting role with that. But also, we're doing another event this year, not in Marceline. However, this one is in Kansas City. So this year, the Disney 100 exhibition, or sorry, Disney 100, the exhibition, is going to be going to Kansas City. So it started in Philadelphia, and now it's in Chicago, and then it's going to be opening up in Kansas City in May. And so we've been working with Kansas City Union Station, which is where this event will be held.
Okay.
And on on May 24th, there's going to be an event that happens there, on the opening day of the celebration. And so our museum will be there to give kind of a special presentation to Walt's, kind of Missouri roots. So we'll be there as part of that event. And also there's the D23 Expo, which has now been renamed D23, the Ultimate Disney Fan Experience. It takes place every other year. We are always there with a booth, and this year is no exception. So we'll be there in August out in Anaheim at the Anaheim Convention Center. We'll be there with a booth. And some of those special things that we had at our event from the June event last year may be on display at our booth.
Very
So you
cool.
may be able
Yeah.
to see some of those things. So we'll have a booth out there, and yeah. So there's always something going on between us and the Disney company. Something else that happened last year too is um, on October 16th, which is on the day that the Walt
Hmm.
Disney Company was officially founded, there was an event that happened at the Walt Disney Studio. And so we were invited out to visit this event. And at the event, they had food items from different decades of Disney history. So, for example, they had tea cakes from the 1960s because of Mary Poppins. They had
Hmm.
meatballs from the 1950s for Lady and the Tramp. And then from the 1920s, they actually had Dusty Miller's. And Dusty Miller is a special ice cream treat you can only get in Marceline.
Oh,
So
cool.
they actually had us as Marceline, as one of those locations for the Disney decades they had food from for their event. So
Really, really cool.
yeah, so there's always different
Yeah.
things that kind of tie us back together. And one more thing before I forget, I just want to make sure I bring up everything that I can. So I mentioned Kay Mallins a few times. Kay is the founder of the museum, but also our executive director. She was actually featured. There's a documentary on Disney Plus. It's called Mickey, the Story of a Mouse, and
Hmm.
she's actually one of the interview subjects for that documentary. So you get to see a little bit of Marceline, and you get to meet Kay if you watch that too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. That another thing on the wish list is to do a D23 at some point. I do remember seeing the watching somebody like live streaming walking through the expo center in 2020, would have been 2022, I guess. Was that
yeah.
that was yeah. Um and they stopped by the hometown museum booth,
Oh, okay,
and
cool.
there was a I I'm I'm trying to remember that. I believe there was a like a park bench
Yeah.
that people could sign. um is that am I correct in that?
Yes. So in Marceline, we have a few traditions. And this kind of started with the building of the Disney barn back for Walt's 100th birthday. So the people who built the barn wanted to sign their names
Hmm.
just as a way to commemorate that they worked on this. And so they did, and that caught on, and a bunch of other people started signing their names when they visited the barn too. And now, if you go to the barn, it's just covered in signatures. Only on the inside, though. Do not sign the outside.
Yeah.
That will get removed. Um, but on the inside, you see all these different signatures. So when the D23 Expos first became a thing, we realized, Marceline is not always easily accessible because we're not attached to a major metropolitan area. We don't have a major airport close by, so it is certainly a journey to get here. And people aren't always able to come to Marceline on a
Hmm.
quick basis. So we thought, well, what we could do is, much like how in the Disney barn, people don't stay in Marceline, but they do leave a little bit of themselves behind. What we could do is, if they can't visit Marceline, they can sign their name on the bench, and we'll take the bench back to Marceline. So that way, we'll
Mm.
take a little bit of them back to Marceline. So as you can see in the picture behind you, benches are kind of a motif for us, and so we do have several of those benches all throughout, not just the museum, but Marceline as a city. We have those benches all around. They're out at the Disney farm, they're at the museum, that people have signed over the years that we've brought back to Marceline. So yeah, you can certainly see those benches throughout the museum if you come by.
Okay, cool. The so someone when someone visits the museum, I want to ask about the kind of we've talked about the sites that people can see around the town of Marceline. When someone visits the museum, what are some of the examples, or what are some of the permanent things they will see there? And then if there are any, if there are ever any temporary exhibits that move through, what can people expect when they go to see?
Yeah, so they will expect to learn about Walt Disney as a person. That is kind of our main focus is to really kind of educate Walt Disney. Um, so in our first gallery, we talk a lot about the same stories I've shared with you already about those visits in 56 and 60
Mhm.
and in 1966 with the Autopia, So we talk about Walt's connection to Marceline as an adult. We also talk about his time here as a child. But then we also have other parts of the museum as well that go into the Disney family as people. I mentioned that our museum was based off Ruth Disney's collection. So we have all these letters that we have a lot of them on display. We also have information about Walt's two older brothers, Herbert and Raymond, which that was something that really stuck out to me when I visited the museum at first, because being diving into Disney history the way I did just as a hobby. I knew a lot about Ruth and I knew a lot about Roy, but I didn't know much about Herbert and Raymond other than
Yeah.
that they just existed and that they were a little bit older than Walt. But coming to this museum, you can really learn a little bit more about both Herbert and Raymond as people, and also about their parents, Flora and Elias. So we have some very special things that are from each of those different family members
Okay.
that we have on display. And then also you'll get to learn a little bit more about these specific things that happened in Marceline that were important to Walt. So, and
Okay.
why they were important to Walt. So, for example, um, Walt himself said, more things of importance happened to me in Marceline than have happened since or are likely to in the future. And he goes further to say that by things, what he means is these lifetime experiences that happened to him while he was in Marceline that stayed with him forever. And, what he's talking about is, he had a lot of first time experiences in Marceline. This is in Marceline is where he started school for the first time. So it's where he started his education. It's where he saw his first movie. It's where he saw his first play. His first play, which by the way was a live theatrical performance of Peter Pan, which was a story that stuck with him the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And not only was that the first play that he saw, the first time Walt acted in front of a crowd, he played the role of Peter Pan in a school play
Okay.
here in Marceline. And he wrote an article called Why I Made Peter Pan. And in the article, he says, no actor ever identified with the part he was playing more than I, when he was playing that part here in Marceline. And I do think that story of a boy who didn't want to grow up was certainly a running theme, and not just Walt's life,
Hmm.
but also his work as well. And so you learn a little bit about these first time experiences Walt had. He also is in Marceline where he developed his love for trains, and obviously trains are a big deal to Disney history. He had a train in his backyard, which then kind of sparked the idea of building a bigger train. With Disneyland, and from the earliest stages of Disneyland, there was always a train that was going to go around the park. And then also here in Marceline, he actually sold his first drawing. So he
Okay.
drew a picture of Rupert the horse that he actually drew for one of his neighbors named Doc Sherwood. Doc was a retired doctor here in town, and he had this a stallion named Rupert. And so Walt drew a picture of Rupert, and that was the first time Walt ever made money on a drawing. And that was a very important moment in his life, as he's told that story several times in different writings. And actually, if you go to Disneyland today, above First Aid, Doc Sherwood has a window above First Aid, so
Hmm.
it was a little tribute to that. But also, um, you know, um, something else that was important to Walt is he had his first foray into show business here. He put on a show at the Disney farm. He housed the Disney Family Circus, in which case it was just a bunch of cats that he put in his sister's doll clothes.
Yeah.
And a lot of the kids that came to watch the circus were less than impressed. And when his mother Flora found out about it, she made him give all the money he made from it back.
Yeah.
And legend has it that Flora told him, "Always give your guests more than they expect."
Hmm.
And so, there's these certain life lessons that Walt learned while he was here. He also fell in love with the concept of storytelling while he was here. He had this friend, or the Disney family actually had a family friend called the Taylors, and they lived on the farm right next to the Disney family. And the Disney family were known to go over there on a weekly basis. And Grandpa Taylor, as Walt put it, was one of his two pals here in Marceline, him and Doc Sherwood. And he said that he learned a lot about storytelling from Grandpa Taylor because Grandpa Taylor always had a story to tell. And he was a Civil War veteran. And as Walt put it, he had a story for every battle of the Civil War, but he actually was not in any of them. So, it's like, kind of that old Mark Twain
Yeah.
statement, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But it did, I think, instill in Walt a sense of storytelling and, ways you can kind of make stories your own.
Yeah.
And so, Walt learned all of these really important things that would eventually develop him into the person that he became, and also the products that he made as well. But I do think there's one aspect of Marceline that, again, in the museum, we talk about all these different things and how they influence Walt. And really what we want to get across is how Disney today is what it is because of Walt, and Walt is who he is because of Marceline. And but there is one really important aspect of Marceline that it was important to Walt and really shaped who he became, and that was that communal aspect of Marceline that I had mentioned before. It was in Marceline that Walt really saw this, kind of community atmosphere. He really longed for this, this kind of the setting of Marceline. See, in Marceline, this was the only time Walt had to be a kid, because as soon as the Disney family left here, he was 9 when the Disney family left. So he lived here from the ages of 4 to 9. And when he moved to Kansas City after he was in Marceline, his dad immediately put him to work on a paper route.
Hmm.
And so, the only time of childhood freedom, creative freedom he had was in Marceline. So whenever Walt thought about his nostalgic childhood years, he wasn't just
Yeah.
thinking about those happy memories. He was also thinking about that they took place in Marceline.
Yeah.
So if you're familiar with the movie Citizen Kane, um, in many ways, Marceline is Walt's Rosebud. It was always that thing that he was kind of chasing after, that he wanted to
Yeah.
kind of recreate. And if you've read Neil Gabler's biography, Walt Disney, Triumph of American Imagination, um, he uses Marceline as kind of this running theme throughout the entire biography,
Yeah.
and that everything Walt was doing, it was almost like he was trying to recreate his time in Marceline from the first time he built a studio from the ground up in California. He wanted to have this family community atmosphere. He wanted, and as Neil Gaiman put it, he wanted to build his own Marceline.
Yeah.
And then he did it again with Disneyland as well. He was always trying to create the place that would, kind of put him back into that right state of mind. And I think we see that in a lot of his products as well. All the films that came out during that time. There are movies that certainly have a slant towards possible, slant towards a child audience, but they also can certainly be enjoyed by adults as well. And it's, we've now seen in culture that these are things that, a lot of us grew up with. And, we want to introduce it to the younger generations, but it's also things that we can go back and we can revisit from a different set of eyes, as we get older and realize that, what, what we saw as kids, we now see through a different lens as an adult, but it's no less impactful. It still, carries just as much weight as it did when we were kids. You can watch Bambi and still be impacted by what you see,
Yeah.
on screen. And I do think a lot of that creative spirit that he put into his work and that he encouraged others to put into his work, was, trying to make sure that, he held on to that community aspect that he felt here in Marceline, that community aspect that, everybody can enjoy and everybody can be a part of. And the best example that we see of anything like that is through Mainstreet USA. So, if you go to a Disney park today, or I say a Disney park, I'm going to use Disneyland as the specific example. But if you go to Disneyland today, um, you can only enter and exit through one place, and that's through Mainstreet USA.
Hmm.
And all these different areas of the park represent different aspects of Walt Disney's interests. You have animals in nature with Adventureland. You have his interest with exploration and American history with Frontierland, and you have his interest in fairy tales with Fantasyland, and then you have his interest with innovation and technology with Tomorrowland. But you can't get to any of those other lands without first going through Main Street. It really
Yeah.
puts you in that right set of mind. It's like that song says, "All roads lead back to Marceline." It's all these different aspects of Walt as a person and his interest in life and work. It all kind of comes back to Marceline and what he experienced here. And so Main Street, while it's not a direct replica of Marceline, it is, we wouldn't have Mainstreet USA in the Disney parks if it wasn't for Walt trying to recreate that idolized version of Marceline that he wanted in
Yeah.
Disneyland. And, Mainstreet USA takes place at a very important time because Walt lived here in the early 1900s,
Hmm.
where he saw things like both horse-drawn streetcars as well as electric vehicles. There was gas lamps and electric lamps happening at the same time. And, he lived on this really interesting place in history where he's got like one foot in the past and one foot in the future. And, Mainstreet USA at the Disney parks really, really replicates that exact same time
Yeah.
period, that he would have been here. So, kind of being a nostalgic futurist in a way. But Marceline really shaped Walt Disney and the work that he did. So if you come to the museum, what we really want you to understand is all these different things that Walt Disney did. All comes back to some of the different experiences he had here.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. But before we get to the rapid questions, I just want to ask, is there anything else you think people should know about the museum before we get to those rapid questions?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I do want to I do hope that people know about the museum when they come is that they do understand more about Walt Disney as a person, and that they do understand his love and connection to Marceline.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, Oftentimes something that we do feel like I've run into some people on several occasions who it's like they feel like they're trying to question our place in history, trying to question our validity, and we've had many people be skeptical about Marceline and either what we could pull off now as far as events go, or why we're important to Disney history as far as some of the other aspects go. We've had people that are skeptical of those things, and then when they've come through the museum, they have been blown away.
Hmm.
And so we've actually had several people apologize to us for being skeptical before they actually arrive. So one thing I do want people to understand is, well, yes, Marceline is a very magical place, and it was very important to Walt. It is a real town. It is a very much a real small town, where it does have a Mary Mayberry-esque quality to it about it. It is a real town, but it also is a place that does hold something very interesting at the same time. And so, I just don't want anybody to have any sort of preconceived notions before they
Yeah.
before they visit. Whether that be um, you're not going to visit a Disney park. It's not a Disney park. We would love to, show you fun things and magical things and things like that. But it is not a Disney park. It is a real place, and we do want to provide you with real historical information in the museum. But we're not going to sugarcoat anything, but we're not going to hide from anything either. It's just we want people to know what happened here, and
Yeah.
we also want people to be blown away by it too. So whether you're expecting a Disney park or whether you're expecting nothing, we are not either of those things. We are our own thing, and so I do want people to know that Marceline is special, but it's uniquely special.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, thank you very, very much. So the rapid questions, we I usually ask uh, 6 or 7 questions. These you can explain if you want. You don't have to give any
Okay.
explanation at all. And as I said before we started, um, I usually uh, I usually ask about the parks. I'll ask a few about the parks because we're talking about the museum. I have some specific ones for the museum, also for the city or for the town. So the first parks related. Um, what is your favorite Disney park? Would that be Walt Disney World?
Actually, no. My favorite Disney park is going to be Disneyland.
Okay.
Even though I worked at Walt Disney World for many years, and I have undoubtedly spent way more time there. Disneyland is my favorite park. I have had the chance to visit Disneyland Paris as well. I haven't been to any of the Asian parks, but I would love to go one day. Um, but Disneyland is just has something that the other parks don't have. You know, it's got
Mhm.
that. It does have a unique spirit about it that you don't find when you visit anywhere else. It has this quaintness to it. It has a genuine kind of appreciation to it by the guests there. There's just like kind of this interesting reverence. It doesn't
Yeah.
take away from the park aspect, and it doesn't take away from the enjoyment anybody's having. But there is just this unique reverence to Disneyland
Mhm.
when you go in there, and everybody seems to kind of be able to pick up on that. And it just kind of really puts people in the right state of mind. And so Disneyland is my favorite park. And I don't think I could ever have any other park that I would like more than Disneyland, just because of the way that makes me feel.
When we went over the summer, that was the first time we went, as I said, and uh, one I had always heard that Disneyland with the family. We have two boys. Um, Disneyland with a family is a lot easier than Walt Disney World because you're not traveling, and it is. I mean, where we stayed, it was like a probably 14-minute walk to the park, and you walk in and there's one security check, and once you get through security you go right if you want to go to Disneyland, you go left if you want to go to California Adventure, you go straight if you want to go to Downtown Disney, which was fantastic, phenomenal. And one thing I did, when we walked in Disneyland, I stopped at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. We spent 2 days in Disneyland, one in California Adventure. um and when we were in Disneyland, I would stop and I would look at the fire station. We I didn't do the apartment tour, but we would stop and take a picture of the fire station, and I would tell the boys what that was and what that meant. The One of the things that really stood out to me that was different about Disneyland, where I mean, there are things that are placed in different parts of the park and everything. Like Big Thunder Mountain is in a kind of a different
Hmm.
place geographically in Walt Disney World, Magic Kingdom, than it is in Disneyland. But New Orleans Square in Disneyland, um, for for a variety of reasons, we ended up in New Orleans Square several times the 2 days that we were there. One, I think, because it's kind of getting to the front of the park. The way that we were going, we just kept walking by New Orleans Square, and we actually, we stopped at the bathroom at the back of New Orleans Square a few times while we were there. And one of the things that I noticed is when you're walking through the alleys, there's one alleyway of New Orleans Square. I caught myself thinking, you know, I don't, this is this quaintness. This not, when you go to Walt Disney World, most places in Walt Disney World, the paths are very wide for crowd
Yeah.
purposes. You go to the newer parks, it's very wide to let as many people in as possible. This place, it seemed like you were walking in a small alleyway in New Orleans, which I thought was really, really cool. And that was one thing that really stood out to me about Disneyland. You mentioned the quaintness, and it is, and it's it is kind of this reverence that people have for it, and just this
Yeah,
appreciation that this is where it started. This is where the theme park for the company started. So
yeah, and it's I love the other Disney parks. There's none I dislike, and I don't want to seem like I'm being negative about any of them, but uh, sometimes, depending on crowd sizes or things going on, it can get crowded and it can seem a little chaotic. But I've never really felt that way at Disneyland,
mhm,
whereas I have at some of the others.
yeah. Um, so next, favorite attraction at any Disney park you've ever been to?
Okay, so my favorite attraction is going to be Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Mr.
Okay.
Toad's Wild Ride is well, first of all, Mr. Toad is my favorite Disney character.
Okay.
So Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, is my favorite attraction. As kind of a companion piece to that. I remember riding that as a kid at Magic Kingdom back when it was
Hmm.
still there, and I didn't remember much of the actual ride because I was too little, except for the end when you get hit by a train and you essentially die. And I remember I certainly was not traumatized by that, but that was certainly the most memorable aspect of the attraction to it. That I just couldn't shake how like that there's an attraction where that happens. And so I remember going to Disneyland for the first time. It's like that was what I was looking forward to do is rewriting Mr. Toad's Wild Ride to just kind of see if my memories from being a kid and new memories as an adult to see how they would match up. And they matched up pretty well, particularly with that ending scene. And that yeah, I mean, it is still the most memorable part of the attraction, but it's just such a unique attraction, and that is something that happens to it. And it's this kind of almost sinister whimsiness, to it
Hmm.
that other Disney attractions don't have. And I'm certainly like to be an optimistic type person, and I'm certainly not a person who likes kind of dark things too much. But for whatever reason, that really captivates my attention.
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of British literature, so maybe that has something to do with it too. I don't know.
Okay.
But Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is my absolute favorite. Disney attraction. Of course, there's many others that I love, and many others that I could kind of put up on the list. Just as an honorable mention, I do have to mention the Great Movie Ride,
Yeah.
because that was my favorite attraction at Walt Disney World. And I'm certainly sad it's gone. However, I really do think Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway is a great attraction, and
Hmm.
I wish there was a place for both of them. I understand, why it's not there anymore, but it was such a unique thing. And I mentioned before that I studied film in college, and my interest really is in film history, and so getting to kind of relive these iconic moments in film was always something that, even as a kid, was captivating to my attention. And it's like I hadn't seen Casablanca or Singing in the Rain when I was younger, but I knew of their cultural importance because of those
Yeah.
iconic scenes, from seeing them in the Great Movie Ride. So I do think there was some level of like film history education that kind of went with that I really appreciated. So
Yeah.
I'm sad it's not there anymore, but that is an honorable mention of mine. I needed to
Yeah.
say.
The two quick points on the Great Movie Ride. I always absolutely love that. And my my oldest son got to ride it. My youngest son wasn't born by the time it closed. And I agree. I mean, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway is a fantastic attraction. Um, when you go into the Chinese theater at Hollywood Studios, and you go on that attract, we went on Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway in Hollywood Studios first. And it's such a cool thing to kind of see how they changed the theater and everything, and then to see the attraction, obviously. Then we went to Disneyland. It's in Toontown, and the setup is just the queue area
Love it.
is so amazing. I have this great story that my youngest son, you know how you walk through the queue area and they have the props from the show, the movies. We walked by one display case with the costume in it, and my youngest son said, "Dad, is that really what he wore?" Like, did he really wear that costume? And it was just that moment, like, it was a very emotional moment for me that I'm like, this is it. Like, and we talk about as adults how we can suspend belief, and you can suspend belief and you can pretend that you are like in a haunted house. You are, riding with Pirates of the Caribbean. You are with Mr. Toad. But like, um, and you suspend belief when you're walking through and you're looking at all these props, but also to have that added benefit of one of my sons asking that. I was like, this is fantastic. I don't think, this is a moment that I want to remember for a long time, because this is the magic of a place like this. And
Yeah,
that was just such a cool memory from that trip. The other thing I want to say about Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is that that always was one of my favorites at Magic Kingdom also. And so I was beyond thrilled that when we went to Disneyland, we probably rode that 5 or 6 times, and the kids loved it. The only thing that um, I wish hopefully we'll return one day, and see, they had the curtain over it because they were working on the facade of the building.
oh yeah,
So
yeah.
you saw the curtain instead of the actual facade. And I told the boys, I said, look, if you saw this actual building, like, it looks just like this curtain does, but obviously it's in 3 dimension. I said, and it just it was such a cool thing to walk into as a kid. Like, you're walking into Toad Hall. That was such a cool thing to do. The last on parks is favorite Disney treat.
Okay. It's kind of changed throughout the years for me. There obviously is so many different iconic, Disney food items. Like when I was a kid, I always had to get a turkey leg.
Hmm.
I don't think I really liked them that much. I just thought it was just so cool to just have that and walk
Hmm.
around with it. And so that was just such a fun thing for me. But turkey legs were a big deal for me back then. But I haven't gotten one in a long time. But as far as food items go, you know, you mentioned New Orleans Square earlier, and one of the things I absolutely love to do when I'm at Disneyland is to go to New Orleans Square, get a mint julep and a beignet.
Hmm.
I love the beignets and the mint juleps there, and um, so I would say it's a tie between the beignets and the mint juleps.
Okay.
I'm a big coffee person myself, so most of the time I just stick with coffee, which is I know is a very non-Disney branded thing. It's just a very generic thing to say. So, but yeah, so it's Disney food items, are iconic, and whenever I'm there and I see something that is attractive, I always have to get it. It's like I can't say it's going to be my favorite, but I always have to get it. So, for example, I remember one of my last visits, they had macaroons in the shape of the Matterhorn, and so I'm like,
Oh,
well,
okay.
I don't care if it tastes good or not. I just want it because it looks good. It
Yeah.
just looks so unique. And I do have to share. A good friend of mine that I actually met while working at Walt Disney World. We both try to visit, Disneyland as often as possible. And whenever each of us is there, we always have this running joke of um, she seems to think that the churros by the Matterhorn are the best churros you can get at any Disney park. That there's something about the churros at that specific churro cart that are a
Yeah.
little bit different. So a running joke is whenever either of us are there, we always get a churro and take a picture in front of it, with it in front of the Matterhorn.
Yeah.
So churros are also important for me. Not that it's my favorite Disney treat, but it is just one of those important things that I got to do when I'm there.
Very cool. So a few on the museum. You've told us
Yeah.
about what people can see at the museum, what people can see around town. So, real quickly, what is your favorite thing, or if you have 2 or 3 things, your favorite thing at the museum?
Yeah. My favorite thing at the museum, and this is something we didn't really get into, but we have a sketch that was done by Walt Disney. And Walt and Rush um, developed a plan while they were friends here in Marceline. And the plan was to take the 40 acres that the Disney family lived on and turn it into a living history farm. So
Okay.
essentially, it would be, kind of this educational place where people could come and learn about what it was like to live on a farm and the importance of that farm to a small town community. So that was something that Walt and Rush started developing in '56, and that was a 10-year project for them. They bought the original 40 acres that the Disney family lived on, and had options on the surrounding 350 acres, or up to 350 acres around. And there was a lot of big plans for Marceline,
Okay.
and for what they were going to do. And the whole thing was called the Marceline Project, and it was set up as a nonprofit venture through Walt's private company called Retlaw, which is Walter spelled backwards.
Hmm.
And Walt did a sketch of what he wanted it to look like. And it's a very rough sketch, but Walt did a sketch of what he wanted this to look like. And unfortunately, Walt passed away before anything could really take off with this project. However, that sketch was on his desk the day he passed away.
Okay.
And it was Roy Disney who actually took that sketch and gave it to Rush, and said it needed to be in Marceline. And so for me, that's just a really important piece of Disney history that we have in Marceline, or that we have in the museum, because it does show Walt's, fascination and dedication to Marceline really come full circle. It was something that was with him at the beginning, all the way up until the very end of his life. And we don't have a whole lot to display about the Marceline project. However, there's so many stories that surround it
Hmm.
that I would love to be able to share one day. Our museum we do use the building fully, so we tell all the stories that we possibly can in the space that we have. But that's certainly a story I would love to expand on one day.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Your favorite thing about Marceline?
Yeah. So my favorite thing about Marceline is, I often joke that okay, a little bit of a context. I've never lived in a small town before moving here, and so I often joke with people that I do feel like I live in a TV show environment.
Hmm.
It's like you go and you watch a TV show, and everybody knows each other, and like the same people just pop up every day, in random circumstances, and that's really what Marceline is like. I mean, it's like I live on Mainstreet USA, so
Yeah.
it's like I can open my front door and I see a restaurant in front of me and a hardware store next to that, and all these different, things that a typical small town would have. And I know that if I go into the hardware store, I know the guys who own it, and I know that they're always going to be there, and I can ask them any questions, and they're going to be able to give me any answers. And most of the time when I'm in there, somebody else is going to walk in that I also have met, or
Yeah.
I also know, from the community. It's just, it really, that was one of the things that struck me about Marceline when I came to visit, is just that friendly vibe that Marceline
Yeah.
gave off. And it's not a fake vibe. It's not a fabricated. It's not disingenuine in any way. It is a true, genuine. People are friendly to each other, and people really want to make sure that everybody's having a good life. And that's something that you really do experience when you visit Marceline. And I think that's something that was around when Walt was here, and it's still here today.
Okay. Do you have a favorite thing you like to tell people about Disney when they visit the museum?
Yeah, so that is a hard question to answer, just because there are so many different stories. It seems like everything in Marceline has a story attached to it, and I'm the type of person that I just want everybody to know every story. Whether they're interested or not, I want them to know about all these different things that I find interesting. And so to narrow it down to just one thing is a little bit difficult. Um, but I do think there is one story that I haven't shared yet on here that I would like to share, that is one of my favorites, and that is something that we actually don't talk about in the museum. We just don't have a space to have any display on this as of right now. But one thing that I do think is really important is there's a story that features a young Walt Disney living on the Disney farm. And the first time Walt ever saw fireworks was here in Marceline. and he saw fireworks as part of the Fourth of July celebration that was going on here in Marceline. And the legend has it that Walt considered that to be the perfect kiss goodnight. And so that was something that he retained. And there's a story that goes where Walt was in the park with Robert and Richard Sherman. They were at Disneyland and they were watching the fireworks, and Walt told Richard Sherman that the fireworks were their kiss goodnight. And so that is often, that phrase
Yeah.
"kiss goodnight" is said when it comes to the Disney nighttime entertainment offerings. And now, whether or not Walt said those things is still kind of
Yeah.
unconfirmed. However, it's the thought of it that really is kind of an important aspect. And Richard Sherman actually wrote a storybook, a children's storybook, with another Disney legend, Floyd Norman. The two of them collaborated on a storybook, and the name of the storybook was called "Kiss Goodnight." And in that book, they actually retrace Walt living here in Marceline on a farm, seeing the fireworks for the first time, all the way up until when they developed Disneyland, where Walt said, we got to give them the perfect kiss goodnight when they leave the park. So whether or not that the accuracy of that story is as it is told in the children's storybook or anything like that, it is an important concept to know that these memories that Walt developed while he was here in Marceline stuck with him, for the
Hmm.
rest of his life. And I'm sure he saw fireworks again after he left Marceline before Disneyland opened. But we can always say that the first time Walt saw fireworks was here in Marceline while he was on the Disney farm, and that left an impact on him. And that was something that he wanted to, leave an impact on his guests when they were at Disneyland. So,
Yeah.
it's just things like that we'd like to make sure our guests know when they come to Marceline.
Yeah, that's really special. And I now have a book that I want to try to look up and see if I can find. The last thing, what's a favorite thing you like to tell people when they visit about the town of Marceline?
Yeah. So, something that I do encourage people to do when they visit Marceline is, it is hard to say. Okay. So, like when you make a trip somewhere, typically you're going to a specific destination,
Hmm.
and if you're at that destination, you try to cram in a few different things, to that. So, for example, if you go to Southern California, if you're making a trip to Southern California, Disneyland could be a part of that, or you could be going specifically just to Disneyland.
Hmm.
Disney does have that kind of unique piece where they can be part of a larger journey, or it can be the journey itself.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I do want to emphasize about Marceline is, oftentimes people will come to Marceline to visit just the museum. They think about just the museum, coming to just the museum. Whereas, I do want to encourage people that it really is kind of hard to narrow in the Disney aspect of Marceline to just the museum, because there are so many different other things that relate to Disney history that are here. And, particularly with those people that would be interested in that sort of thing, I want to make sure that they know about that, and I want to make sure that they don't just visit the museum and they leave. I want to make sure that they visit the museum.
Hmm.
They go to the Disney farm, they walk down Mainstreet USA, they go to Ma Vic's Corner Cafe and get a Dusty Miller. They do all these things that, have become important to the community of Marceline, other than just to visit the museum, because, I really do have a hard time telling people to come and visit the museum, because I would just want to say, come and visit Marceline. I
Yeah.
want to make it a little bit more broad, and I want to, make sure that that they know that Marceline itself, while yes, it is its own town, Marceline as a whole is so steeped with this cultural and historical importance that I hope people experience. So
Yeah. Well, thank you. And again, thank you for doing this. The people who want to learn more about the museum or connect with you and ask questions, what's the best way for them to get hold of you or with the museum?
yeah, so our website is waltdisneymuseum.org. in which case that's all social media handles as well at waltdisneymuseum.org. We try to post things online that are going to be interesting historical pieces that relate back to Walt, relate back to Marceline. But we try to give you a different experience online that you're going to get if you actually visit the museum. You know, we do want to broaden that Disney experience and Disney knowledge as much as we can. So anything through social media, or you know, if you visit the website, you'll see our email our email address is going to be info@waltdisneymuseum.org. That's always a good place if you have a specific question or something like that as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for doing this. This was a whole lot of fun, Sumner, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.